Hi, my name is the Reverend Jane Milliken Haig, and welcome to the third Sunday of Lent. This is a series of meditations that takes the Sunday liturgy, especially the Gospel, and combines it with poems by Mary Oliver, using a special booklet called The Poetry of Lent. The third Sunday of Lent, we start with the Gospel of John. For the last two Sundays, we've been dwelling in Mark. But as I said before, Mark is a short gospel. So in order to have all of Mark and all Sundays featured with a gospel, John is interloped throughout the service. And so for the next three Sundays, we will be dwelling with John. The gospel lesson for the third Sunday of Lent is Jesus and the throwing out the money changers in the temple. It is John 2, verses 13 through 25. The story is that Jesus gets very angry and pushes over the different tables that are used by the money changers in the temple. The history of that is the fact that you needed to have a sacrifice of an animal that was unblemished when you went to the temple. And so to have an unblemished animal, you needed to probably buy it there. As somebody said, you know, if you carried your animal, if you brought your animal from 3 weeks away, it wouldn't be unblemished by the time that you got to the temple. Plus, you needed to buy that animal through temple change, temple money, not the common currency that the Romans had outside of the temple. All this to say is that Jesus got very angry, and we're not quite sure whether it was because the money changers were cheating, or whether it was the fact that there was a marketplace going on in the temple. John's version is the fact that Jesus is trying to literally overturn the idea of sacrifice as animal sacrifice as a necessary ingredient of worship. Combined with Mary Oliver's poems, the theory is that Jesus was saying that there is more to worshiping God than just being within that temple. And that the temple at one point was a sort of a symbol, and now it is more, we are the temple, that our lives, that nature is the temple, that where does the temple begin and where does it go from there? Mary Oliver's poem is Why I Wake Early, which comes from her book that she wrote in 2004. Mary Oliver uses not only nature, but she also borrows frequently from music. Mendelssohn is one of her favorites. But in this case, she's almost directly borrowing from Gerald Manley Hopkins. Mary Oliver was an English professor, and she would do one-year gigs throughout the Northeast Corridor and in the South. She would just come in and teach for a year on a special fellowship or whatever. For someone who never went to college, she was very well read as far as other poets and other arts, if you will. Gerald Manley Hopkins talks about stipple upon trout as they swim, whereas Mary Oliver calls it nibbling tinsel-eyed fishes. Mary Oliver's whole thing is about paying attention and being astonished as an example of watching for for God's creation, and all of God's creation is the temple. So going back to Jesus talking about and getting angry at the idea that the temple and the sacrifice and everything else that had been the tradition of the Judeo faith was now no more, and it was greatly expanded. Mary Oliver in essence became an Episcopalian primarily because of her concern for the afterlife when her partner Molly Malone Cook was diagnosed with terminal illness. And she wanted to know whether she could ever see Molly again. And so she turned to Bishop Shaw, and anyway, she was asked, Molly died, and then unfortunately Bishop Shaw died. And she was asked some years later whether she still went to church. And she said no, that the building could no longer hold her and her faith. Which goes back to these readings and this poem, is where is the temple start and where does it begin and where are we to worship God? I hope you're having a holy Lent. I hope you are being astonished. In our book, it says that we are to light a candle for courage. I hope you are being courageous in this Lent, thinking beyond the temple doors, if you will, into where do you see God speaking to you and where do you worship God? Thanks for being here.